Hey guys, so this video isn't for a song tutorial, it's just a quick video to show you guys how to do volume swells. I've had a few people ask me how to do it with my setup, so I'd figure I'd make a video and explain it. Basically what you need a delay pedal. I use two actually for my volume swells, because I have them, but you don't need to, and my volume pedal. So, before I explain how to do it, I'll just kind of give you an example of what my volume swells sound like. So that's with clean. Sometimes I'll put on some distortion and it'll ring a little bit more, like. So that's kind of the sound we're working towards. So now I'm going to give you guys a close-up of my board, because what I'm doing with the guitar is pretty unimportant when it comes to volume swells in terms of technique. Okay, so here's my board. Volume pedal, 1 delay, 2 delay. This is what the delays I have. Basically, when you're making a delay patch for volume swells, you want it to have a lot of repeats, the repeats to be very loud, but the timing of them doesn't really matter. Like I don't tap in with the song or anything. I just set it the same always. So this is what the delays sound like for my volume swell setting. So it's pretty much nothing. It has no definition as a delay. So I put that one on. I also put the carbon copy on just because it's got the modulation, and it sounds really nice. So together, just the delays sound like this. Which sounds like a complete mess. But the thing is, you don't want to hear that delay sound. You're just looking to hear, you're just looking for it to carry over the sound you're inputting from here. So basically, you pick when you're in heel down, and then you bring it in. So all those crazy messy sounding delays are now carrying over that note, and you don't hear it. How the delay divides it up. You just get one smooth tone, and then once your heel's back down, you can play your next note. So like I said before, sometimes I add distortion to add a little more grit, but it just depends on the character of the song you're going for. So that's how I do my volume swells. One tip I'll say, be very, very, very careful, because if you play the wrong note, or if you play the note at the wrong time, this is what you get. And that does not sound at all like what you're going for. So sometimes if you ride the pedal too fast, or you play the wrong note, you're stuck with that bad sound for a long time because you've got your delay carrying on for a lot of repeats. So just be careful when you're playing with volume swells, because if you play a wrong note, everyone's going to hear it. And I've done that many times while you're getting used to it. But practice a lot at home, and it's not that too complicated, and yeah, it adds a lot of different elements to your sound. So the other thing I get asked about most is how an effects loop works, or why I run my pedals in an effects loop. So obviously that's something I do, and I mentioned in my gear tour video. So I'm going to break that down a little bit more. First I'm going to just show you how I run my effects loop, just if you're curious how to wire it. And then I'm going to talk about why you do such a thing. So yeah, I'll show you my rig and explain how to wire an effects loop. So when you're doing an effects loop, you need 4 cables total. The first cable I run is right from my guitar straight into my full drive. So it goes from my full drive, then to my governor, then my governor into my Boss tuner. Then out of my Boss tuner, I run cable number 2 into the main input of my amp. So this is the input on anyone's amp. That's normally what you just plug your guitar into or your pedals into after your guitar. I actually use, for anyone who has a Blues Deluxe, I actually use the -6 dB pad input, just because then I can turn up my gain a little bit, get tubes cooking a little hotter, but not have the same volume. So that, for anyone who doesn't have this amp, this input just basically takes your guitar, or the signal coming into this input, it takes it down 6 decibels from what the main input is. So that's just for my Blues Deluxe. So basically, guitar to overdrive pedals, cable 1, out of my tuner to the amp, main input, cable 2. Now, cable 3. This one comes out of preamp out on my amp, or preamp send, effects send. They'll have a different label on different amps. So I come out of my preamp out, that's the third cable, and I run it into my volume pedal. And then on my volume pedal, I run into my Boss DD20, then I run into my carbon copy, and then out of the carbon copy is cable number 4, and I run that back into the amp into power amp in, or effects return, or post send, something like, or not post send, so, something like that. So basically you use the extra 2 jacks in your amp, and then once you run into the power amp in, then you've got sound again. So that's 4 cables, guitar to first pedal chain into main input, out of preamp out into the second pedal chain, out of the second pedal chain into power amp in. So that's what you run. Now I'm going to talk about why you do that, why I put the distortions before the preamp, and why I put the delays after the preamp. Okay, before I get into this, I'll let you guys know that I'm an electrical engineering student, so sorry if I use too many technical words. I'm going to really try and keep that out, but if 1 or 2 slips in, sorry, hopefully you can understand. So basically, in guitar amplifier design, there's 2 different parts of the amplifier. There's the preamp, as I was talking about, and the power amp. The preamp is where most of the tone and the character of the amp comes from. The power amp is where most of the boost in the signal, and where you just amplify your signal and get it loud so people can hear it pumping through the speaker, basically. So, with the preamp, one important thing to know about the preamp is the amplitude, or the volume of the signal that hits the preamp drastically affects the tonal character of what's coming out of it. So you'll notice this if you turn your guitar, if you just plug your guitar straight into your amp and you turn the volume knob down, your tone will probably sound very thin and empty, and you turn the volume of your guitar up and it becomes a lot more full and round, and just it sounds way beefier. So that's primarily the act of the preamp. And the power amp, like I said, it responds more. Its job is more to just straight amplify. So the volume of the signal hitting the power amp isn't nearly as impacting on the tone coming out of the power amp as it is on the preamp. So if that makes sense, and now I'll talk about an effects loop. What an effects loop allows you to do is allows you to put effects in between the preamp and the power amp. So it's almost as if you have 2 amplifiers. So you have some effects, your guitar, some effects, then you have your preamp, then you can put more effects in between the 2 amps, and then you have your power amp, and then you have your speaker. So yeah, the effects loop just lets you sandwich effects right in the middle, because some effects sound better in there. First of all, effects that sound best before the preamp, so between your guitar and your amplifier. Drives. Overdrives and distortions, absolutely. You'll be hard pressed to find someone who prefers them in an effects loop. Most people will always put their drives and whatnot before a preamp, because that's how the pedals are usually designed. When distortion pedals are designed, normally they're tested and expected to be running before the preamp. And like I said, volume really impacts the tonal character of the preamp, and if you play more blues stuff, something like that, and you want that just breakup, and you want to put your boosts and overdrives before the preamp, because if you boost the line signal, then you'll get a better breakup than if you put your boosts and drives before your power amp. So yeah, those type of pedals sound best there. Now delays usually sound best in the effects loop, so before the power amp, but after the preamp. Now this is because normally, unless you like doing lots of slapback and stuff like that, most delay settings, you have your loud first repeat and you get quieter and quieter and quieter as your repeats continue on. Now like I said, volume of the signal hitting the preamp affects it. So if your signal from your delay pedal is getting quieter and quieter and quieter, the preamp will have less tone on each of those repeated notes. So often people, like when I used to run my delays before my preamp, my delays sounded a little muddy as they tailed off. There wasn't the crispness of the original notes. When you put your delays in before the power amp, the volume isn't as big of a factor, so you still get your crisp tone coming out of your preamp, hitting the delay pedal and then to the power amp, so you still get those crisp full sounds coming out of your delay pedals as opposed to the muddy, more subdued ones. And again, this is all personal taste. Some people like that, the muddier or the more, whatever you want to call it, the tone of the repeats kind of being muffled like that. And experiment. That's the biggest thing. Everything I say about order, take everything with a grain of salt because it's all based on what you think sounds best. It's all your ear. But this is kind of, it's pretty standard to do what I'm talking about. So that's why the delays sound best before the power amp, because they maintain their crispness. Now here's, the volume pedal is different for different people. Some people use a volume pedal as a boost pedal, and they want to, when they put all the way up, when they do heel up, they want to get that little bit of grip, the extra oomph. And in that case, you're going to want your volume pedal before your preamp, because that'll add the extra grit and the extra tone. However, I use my volume pedal exclusively pretty much for volume swells. So I want the tonal character of my volume swells to be even across the whole sweep of my pedals. If I put it before the preamp, the tone would be changing as I brought my toe forward. But because I have it before the power amp, I maintain a fairly even tone across the whole sweep. In full heel down, the first little bit, there is a definite tonal difference, but it's more even than it would be before a preamp. So if you're doing volume swells, put your volume pedal in the effects loop. If you're using it as a boost, add extra grit, put it before the effects loop. Another thing to note that's actually pretty important is line level and instrument level signals. Basically, going from your guitar to your preamp, that's all a much smaller amplitude signal. It's a quieter signal, and most pedals, all pedals are designed to easily handle those level signals. However, in your effects loop, you're seeing a lot louder signal because it's already been amplified by the preamp. Not as much as the power amp amplifies, but it has been amplified already. Therefore, some pedals aren't expecting to see such a loud signal, and you can get some undesirable effects. For example, I've got a 25k ohm volume pedal. That's the resistance of the pot that's inside there. If you want a 25, if you're going with Ernie balls, you want a 25k ohm pedal if you're doing amplified signals. So for active instruments, like if you're using an electric acoustic guitar, or if you're putting in the effects loop, you want the 25k ohm volume pedal. If you're doing it for instrument level signals, or passive instrument level signals, you want a 250k ohm pot in your volume pedal. So there's differences there. With my Boss DD20, it actually has two modes. It has a mode for putting it before the effects loop and a mode for putting it in the effects loop, and it drastically changes it. I didn't know that at first when I put it in the effects loop, and my delay sounded worse in the loop. And then I realized that you have to adjust the settings in there to get yeah, the proper signal. And my carbon copy, it doesn't care. It's good for both levels of signals. So just do a little research, read the manual that comes with your pedal to see if it's going to be happy in an effects loop, if you need to change any settings in the effects loop, or if it's going to perform poorly in the effects loop, because the signal level does matter for the pedals. I think that's all I have to say about effects loops. Hopefully that all made sense. It's a little complicated at first, but yeah, you can get definitely some interesting tones and really improve your sound by using an effects loop, depending on your situation. One more thing I will add though is you want to use good quality cables if you're running effects loops, because you're running 4 cables, and because of how I play and stage setups I'm usually on, I run 4 20-foot cables. Most people would say that's a bad idea, and I probably lose some tone because of it. The longer your cable is, you're going to lose some of your highs if it's not a high quality low capacitance cable. So that's something to keep in mind. Keep your cables shorter if you can. If you can't, it is what it is, but just know that is a potential side effect. So thanks for watching, and I'll answer any questions anyone might still have about all this nonsense.